Hello and welcome to the workshop on paragraphs, introductions, and conclusions. Today's goals will be to know the elements of introductions and conclusions, as well as be able to choose introduction and conclusion writing strategies that fit the assignment. First, let's take a look at the introduction. The introduction has three main goals: to lead the reader into the essay, introduce what is already written, and tie easily to the conclusion. Here's a reminder before writing your introduction. Each essay ultimately looks like this. Notice how the body paragraph makes up the largest portion of your essay. So why start with your introduction, which is often the most difficult to write? You should really start at the star. This is your draft thesis, which will of course change based on the information you provide in the body paragraphs. Once you have written your body paragraphs, then you can write your introduction. It's an inverted triangle because you start your introduction generally and then work into more specificity. Once you have completed your working thesis and your body outline, you are ready to start the intro and finally do the conclusion. We will discuss what to include in the introduction next. But before writing your introduction, you first have to take a look at the paper prompt. So here's a sample assignment. Write about the value of a college education. This is a very common assignment that you might see in an English 1101 course. So we need to draft a working thesis or a draft thesis, which will change based on our sample prompt. A working thesis is an early draft of your thesis. You might revise or refine it as you continue to work. The working thesis for our sample assignment is: education's purpose is to prepare students for the real world. Here's our tentative outline. After you have drafted your working thesis, you wrote your body paragraphs. They might look something like this. One of your points might be knowledge through education, and within that paragraph you would discuss study skills and major specific material. Another point of that sample assignment might be knowledge through life, in which you will discuss the value of hard work and employment opportunities. Then, after your body, you can write your introduction, changing your draft thesis as needed. Now we're ready to write our introduction. And the structure is as follows. Remember that inverted triangle, which starts generally with an attention getter and works more specifically with a thesis statement. The attention getter gets the reader's attention in a way that makes them want to read and continue to read. Think of it as the opening scene of a movie. The background information tells the reader what he or she needs to know in order to understand what he or she is going to read in the body of the essay, and it also provides a smooth transition from the attention getter into the thesis. After you give an attention getter and background information, you now will state your thesis. We will cover how to formulate a thesis in a little bit, but let's first take a look at the first part of an introduction, the attention getter. Some attention getters work better for some specific purposes. Here are just a few examples of our attention getter strategies. For instance, a statistic would work well for an informative essay, whereas a quotation would work well for a descriptive essay. There's also the strategy of using an anecdote or a personal story, which you can use for a personal narrative. These are just a few attention getters. There are many more introduction strategies that you can use in your attention getter. Let's take a look at an example of all three. An anecdote is a short, interesting story. In the introduction, it would help illustrate something or someone that's connected to the main point. Think of it as giving a portrait of a person, place, or time. Anecdotes are best used for controversial topics or for personal essays. Here's an example of an anecdote that I might use for my sample assignment on the value of a college education. My philosophy class meets twice a week in the early morning. The students, about 20 of us, tend to drag in and slump looking a little lost. To get the discussion moving, my instructor usually starts off with a joke or a bizarre question. Here's an example of what a quotation might look for the same essay. In her essay, Teaching to Transgress, Bell Hooks states that pedagogy, quote, seeks to transform consciousness to provide students with ways of knowing that enable them to know themselves better and live in the world more fully. When you use a quotation, make sure you tell who said it, the attribution, and make clear why you have used it, the significance of the quote. Also remember to cite where the quote came from. Here you can see I've stated that it came from the essay Teaching to Transgress on page 194. Quotations are best used for literary analysis papers or persuasive essays. Statistics work well, especially if it's a surprisingly high or surprisingly low number. Here's an example. David Leinhart of the New York Times reports that college students from four-year schools in the United States made 98% more an hour on average in 2013 than people without a degree, according to the Labor Department statistics by the Economic Policy Institute. This statistic shows evidence. It's best used for research papers and argumentative essays. Now that we've taken a look at a few examples of an attention getter, let's look at the background information section of the introduction. The background introduces an aspect of the topic that the audience accepts. Then we use the thesis statement to disrupt that background information with a problem. There are three main reasons we need to provide background information. Those reasons are to set up the context, suggest the direction of the essay, and provide facts the readers need to know. Let's take a look at all three of these reasons. How can we set up the context? Well, the context should set up time, place, and events. Here's an example for our sample assignment. In today's world, many believe that college's sole purpose is to communicate information for students to store and draw on as necessary. By storing this information, students hope to perform well on tests. As you can see, I've set up what the circumstance is based on my sample assignment. Now I need to incorporate facts readers need to know. Good test scores assure good grades, which in turn eventually lead to good jobs. Providing information the audience needs to know helps them realize why they need to read this essay. It solidifies the importance. It answers the question, so what? Why should I care about this essay? It also allows the reader to accept the information you are presenting to them as truth. Think about what your audience needs to know in order for them to familiarize themselves with your topic. Now, let's suggest the direction of the essay. In the essay, we will discuss preparing students for the real world and allowing access to life knowledge in that order, based on the information provided. The direction of the essay might overview major ideas and topics that the essay will explore. In our example here, however, education's true purpose is to prepare college students for the real world by allowing them access to pertinent life knowledge available in their studies. You won't want your first paragraph to be about life knowledge, since that's not how you presented the direction of the essay in the introduction. Now that we've gone over attention getters and background information, let's take a look at our thesis statement. Remember, we have already written a draft thesis. The thesis is generally the last statement in the introduction. It provides something new about the topic, basically your assertion on the issue, and states the main points of the essay. The thesis statement formula contains 4 specific parts in one sentence, in no particular order. Your thesis statement should include the topic, essentially what is the given subject, what are you writing about. In our sample essay, the topic was the value of education. Your thesis statement also needs to include an assertion. This is your take on the subject, what stance you are taking that's different from anyone else's. This can also be debatable. The significance can show why you are taking the stance or how you will show the stance. It often, but not always, uses words like because, through, or by. I'll show you an example of this later on. Your audience is who the paper is geared toward. Don't think of your audience as the reader. That's your instructor. That's the person who's giving you your grade. But your instructor might not be the person who would benefit from reading your essay. It's also not your class. You want your audience to be as specific as possible. So let's take a look at our original draft thesis based on our sample assignment. Education should entice students to apply pertinent knowledge to daily life struggles. Now, can we insert that information into our 4 main parts? Essentially, can we copy and paste every word in that draft thesis into topic, assertion, significance, and audience with no parts left over? Well, our topic is education, and our assertion, the stance we are taking, is that it should entice them to apply pertinent knowledge to daily life struggles. However, it does not tell us how we can entice them or why we should entice them. So it's missing this significance. Here, our audience is students, but that's pretty general. What type of student are we talking about? If we're talking to high school students, that would look a lot different than if we're talking to upperclassmen in college, for instance. So now let's take a look at a revised thesis. The revised thesis is more specific to the assignment and to my goal of what I'm trying to achieve in the essay. Education should entice college students to apply pertinent knowledge to daily life struggles through reflection upon the world in order to change it. Let's see if we could plug each element into our formula. Our topic remains the same, education, as well as our assertion should entice to apply pertinent knowledge to daily life struggles. Now we have included a significance. How should they do this? Through reflection upon the world. Why? In order to change it. And our audience has now become more specific to college students. The significance here presents what others have said about the topic, and the assertion reiterates what you are trying to say that's new about the topic. Now let's take a look at our introduction and completion. Remember, we're having all 3 parts put together into that paragraph. The attention getter, background information, and now our revised thesis. Here's what it would look like. David Lionheart of the New York Times reports that college graduates from 4-year schools in the United States made 98% more an hour on average in 2013 than people without a degree, according to Labor Department statistics by the Economic Policy Institute. In today's world, many believe that college's sole purpose is to communicate information for students to store and draw on as necessary. By storing this information, students hope to perform well on tests. Good test scores assure good grades, which in turn eventually lead to good jobs. However, education's true purpose is to prepare college students for the real world by allowing them access to pertinent life knowledge available in their studies. Education should then entice college students to apply this pertinent knowledge to daily life struggles through reflection upon the world in order to change it. We used a statistic here as our attention getter. Often, your thesis might need to be reworded just a bit to fit with the attention getter and the background information. Now that we've looked at an introduction and its completion, let's take a look at some common introduction practices that we should avoid. Having too long or too short of introductions is the first thing that we should avoid. The length of your introduction should be in proportion to the length of your essay. For longer essays, you can use 2 paragraphs for your introduction. For books, they might have an entire chapter. For a shorter essay, 2 paragraphs would be overkill. Asking vague rhetorical questions is something else that should be avoided. Explicitly stating your intent doesn't intrigue your reader to keep reading. saying things like, I'm going to convince you of X, Y, and Z. Or in this essay, I will talk about X. Not very intriguing here. You don't have to obviously state what your intent is because they will read on into the paragraphs which will discuss what X, Y, and Z are in further length. Don't begin your intro with an obvious statement. These make your reader wonder why they should care to keep reading. Using a phrase like, it was a day like any other day, or the day I won the lottery, or sometimes bad things happen to good people, doesn't draw your reader in. In fact, it shouldn't be used as a title either. You want to be more creative than that. Now we're ready to move on to our conclusion. Our conclusion should do several things. It should leave a strong positive impression, wrap up the essay, tie the paper together, leave readers with something to consider, and answer the question, so what? Our conclusion strategy is a reverse of the introduction. The conclusion starts narrowly with the thesis and gets broader, like the end of a conversation. Your conclusion starts specifically and works into more general information. You start with the thesis statement, but here you want to show the thesis in a new way, now that the audience understands your point. You also want to provide a significance, which answers so what, why should we care, which you try to answer in the essay. And then you're going to end your conclusion with a clincher, which is just another strategy left to make a mark on your reader. Let's first look at how we can restate our thesis. Here's what our thesis looked like at the beginning. Education should entice college students to apply pertinent knowledge to daily life struggles through reflection upon the world in order to change it. In order to reword our thesis, think of changing the structure of your sentence. Begin with a different word in a different place or section of your thesis. Sometimes your thesis reworded can also include a summary of your main points. Here, we reworded the thesis to say, college students can change the world through the knowledge they gain in school. The restated thesis in the conclusion doesn't have to include all four parts of the thesis statement formula as we did before. You now want to reword the thesis since the audience has read your essay and gained insight on the topic. Now let's take a look at the so what of what you have stated in your essay. The significance explains so what, or why should I care. In this example, people can be intelligent in many distinct ways, and students are unique because of their different learning styles, for example, visual versus auditory. Therefore, if the goal is to educate every student, then standardizing his or her education is not an effective teaching method. Well, so what? The point is that it may lead to future changes. Why should I care is because it suggests that the view may be flawed. As we continue on in our conclusion, we're taking a look at our clincher. This is a final statement that leaves the reader feeling satisfied. The clincher is often the most difficult sentence to write in your conclusion. Here's an example of 3 different strategies that you can use. Just like there are strategies to use in the introduction to grab the audience's attention, we use strategies in the conclusion to wrap everything up for our audience. And just like the other strategies, some of these work better for certain types of essays. For instance, a call to action works great for a persuasive essay. Let's take a look at some examples of these strategies. Closing the circle means to allude to the hook or attention getter that you used in your introduction. So for this sample assignment, in my introduction, my attention getter was David Lionheart of the New York Times reports that college graduates from 4-year schools in the United States made 98% more an hour on average in 2013 than people without a degree, according to Labor Department statistics by the Economic Policy Institute. My strategy in the conclusion, therefore, would be to allude to that attention getter. This year, the Economic Policy Institute reports that average wages of workers with a college degree are nearly twice that of those with a high school degree only. So now I have taken the 2013 statistic that I used in the attention getter, and I have provided the most recent statistic that I found from the same place, the Economic Policy Institute. Here's an example of a prediction. If teachers can develop innovative ways to utilize students' talents and interests, rather than just inviting them to be passively involved in an already in place curriculum, more students might respond. If you notice, certain words like if and might are providing a value of this idea. What is that value? That it may influence further changes. And here's a call to action strategy used for the same assignment. Colleges should place students in environments that provide provoking opportunities, and it is the responsibility of students to seize these opportunities whenever possible. Notice the word should here is providing a recommendation or suggestion for the reader to follow. Call to action works really well for persuasive or argumentative essays where your goal is to change your audience's stance. So here's all of the parts of a conclusion structure put together. You need to restate your thesis, provide a significance, and offer a clincher. Let's look at what our completed conclusion would look like for the same sample assignment. College students can change the world through knowledge they gain in school. People can be intelligent in many distinct ways, and students are unique because of their different learning styles, for example, visual versus auditory. If the goal is to educate every student, then standardizing his or her education is not an effective method. Therefore, colleges should place students in environments that provide provoking opportunities, and it is the responsibility of students to seize these opportunities whenever possible. Now let's talk about the conclusion practices that we should really avoid. You don't need to start with an obvious conclusion transition like in conclusion or to summarize. A transition is typically not needed for a conclusion since we limit it to one paragraph, so it's obvious that the last paragraph is the conclusion. Do not restate your topic sentences as a summary, and do not discuss new or irrelevant topics. If you bring up something new, you're leaving your audience hanging and readers feel the essay is incomplete. They want to learn about that new information you just provided. So, introductions and conclusions, lead the reader into the essay, and then leave a very strong, positive impression. Thank you very much for attending the workshop today.